Hi class, in today's lecture I'll be going over unstructured and semi-structured interviewing. These are important methodology to learn because you're more likely than not you're going to use this method when you're conducting qualitative research. Let me go ahead and get started. There are four different types of interviewing. The first is informal interviewing. In this type of interview, the researcher just tries to remember the conversations that he had heard during a course of a day. This usually requires constant jotting and daily sessions in which jottings are turned into extended field notes. Informal interviewing is used in ethnographic fieldwork to build rapport and to uncover new topics of interest. When I was conducting research in the Philippines on smoking behavior among Filipinos, I've done a lot of informal interviewing where I just go to the communities of interest and talk to people about their sense about smoking in their community. And I didn't have any set questions at all. I just wanted to get a sense of what the community will talk about with regards to that topic. And I usually carry with me a small notebook and I jot down notes during the course of the day. The second interview type is unstructured interviewing. This is different from informal interviewing in that unstructured interviewing there is actually a purpose to it, meaning to say that interviewing involves an actual interview, but the idea is to get the people to open up and let them express themselves in their own terms at their own pace. A lot of what is called the ethnographic interviewing is unstructured. And unstructured interviewing is used in situations where you have lots and lots of time and can interview people on more than one occasion. So a lot of the researchers don't use this method just because, well, quite frankly, there is not a lot of time sometimes to conduct a study. What often you will find in qualitative studies is semi-structured interviewing. And semi-structured interviewing has much of the freewheeling quality of unstructured interviewing, but is based on the use of an interview guide. And this is the type of interviewing that I also use during my research in the Philippines. When I've finally identified the key informants that I will be interviewing, I developed a question guide where I know the topics that I will cover during my interview, but I have the freedom to go different um, in different sections of the question guide that I have developed based on the responses that I'm getting from my respondent. It was important for me to continue with a certain topic during the interview with my respondents so that I can get a lot more or more meaningful data for my study. The fourth type of interview is called the structured interviewing. In structured interviews, people are asked to respond to as nearly identical a set of stimuli as possible. So basically, you have your interview schedule and questionnaires, and they are fully structured, and they just follow that guide. And you read the questions the way they are written on that guide. So when do we use unstructured interviewing? Well, we usually use unstructured interviewing when we want to know about lived experiences of people. Um, and when we're doing unstructured interviewing, we want to assure our respondents, our informants, that we will make sure that they are not identified and that their personal information is kept confidential. And you should put that in the consent form. We should also assure them that their participation is crucial and that you know we are really interested in what they have to say. Those are really important points to to let your informants know when you're conducting unstructured interviewing. Um, when we are also doing unstructured interviewing, it's important that we get our informants into a topic of interest and then basically have them give them the floor. Just get out of the way, have them talk about this topic. Record as much as you can by jotting down notes, and if possible, doing a visual or tape recording of the interview. Um, and don't decide what is important in the topic that you are interviewing respondents about. Let the informant provide the information that he or she thinks is important. Very important point to remember when conducting unstructured interviewing. When we're conducting interviews, it is important that we are able to probe for responses, because some informants are just not very descriptive with the answers that they give you, no matter how hard you work in developing your interview questions. The key to successful interviewing is knowing how to probe effectively. We need to make sure that we don't um, ask probing questions that are will bias the answer of our informants. We want to make sure the probing that we do is neutral and without judgment. And being good at probing takes a lot of practice. There are different types of probing. There is the silent probe, where you just remain quiet and wait for the person to continue talking. There is the echo probe, which you simply repeat the last thing that your respondent has said and then asking them to continue. There is the aha probe, in which you encourage your informants to continue with a narrative by just making comments like, aha, yes, I see. Another probe is called the tell me more probe. You can simply ask your respondents, could you tell me more about that, whatever topic that is. Sometimes when we have questions of hows and whys, it is important to ask them in chunks. So rather than asking, how do you plant a home garden, you should ask, what are all the things you have to do to actually get a home garden going? Another long question is, why do you think there is gun violence in schools? Rather than asking that question, because it can get your respondents into different directions, you should just ask, what are the reasons, and you can be specific. What are the personal reasons for do you think there is gun violence in schools? So using the question of what rather than how or why, because they can take a long time to respond to. Probing by lead is another type of probing, and that's asking leading questions based on what the informant has said in the past. And this one requires a lot of practice. You have to really know the topic that you're interviewing your respondents. You have to be good in remembering what they have said, so that you can probe by leading or probing by lead. The other probing is baiting, the phased assertion probe. It's acting like you already know something to get people to open up. The better you learn the art of probing, the better you get at making people to open up, and the more responsible you become that they don't later suffer from emotional distress for having done so. Successful interviewing takes a variety of skills. It may require that you learn a specialized vocabulary, if you're researching a particular culture, or even a new language. Especially if you're interviewing folks that are um, not from the U.S., for example, um, interviewing immigrants in the U.S., you may need to learn a new language, or you may need to get an interpreter or a translator. You also have to learn to pace a set of interviews to avoid boredom and fatigue. You want to develop your interviews so that you have a lively exchange with your respondents, and not to keep the interview too long that your informants become bored and just tired of doing the interview. Um, a few more points about interviewing. Interviewing produces a huge amount of data, and so whenever possible, you should record all of your structured and semi-structured interviews, unless people specifically ask you not to. Okay, a good omnidirectional microphone helps in the interviewing. So invest in a good microphone when if you plan to do interviews for your own research studies. Remember, it can take from 6 to 8 hours to transcribe 1 hour of recorded speech. If you transcribe your interviews, invest in a transcription machine. It's a very tedious process, and if you have the budget to do it, getting a transcriber to transcribe your interviews would be a good choice. Voice recording software can cut the time it takes for transcription in half. Um, some of you may have heard of, I think it's called Dragon something. Anyway, you know, those are voice recording type of software that transcribes for you. That's a pretty cool software, but it's not perfect. One type of qualitative method that we use is focus groups, and focus groups are done for specific reasons, and we'll talk about that a bit later. But in focus groups, individuals are recruited to discuss about, for example, how they feel about a certain product, how they feel about a certain health condition, certain needs. We use focus groups in assessing social programs, getting stakeholder reaction to proposed programs, exploring whether questions on the survey seem, inappropriate to the respondents, and when we need help in interpreting the results of our survey or our program evaluation. So focus groups are important in those five regards. Focus groups are a good complement for surveys. Survey researchers may use a focus group to help them in designing their questionnaire. And a focus group can discuss the wording of a particular question and offer advice on how the questions of the questionnaire are felt or seen by the respondents. Focus groups typically have between 6 to 12 members and then a moderator. It is also helpful, if possible, to have a note taker in addition to the moderator. The participants in a focus group should be more or less homogeneous and in general should not know one another. So you want to make sure that if you are wanting you're wanting to understand decisions made by women, then you want to make sure that you have a homogeneous group of women, meaning to say that they should come from a similar age group and or socioeconomic status. Um, and also it depends on the type of research questions that you have in terms of picking the right homogeneous group. Another point in conducting focus group, you can analyze focus group data with the same techniques as you would use um, in any type of field notes, life histories, or open interviews, and so on. So same sort of deal. When conducting interviews, whether unstructured or semi-structured, there are response effects that we need to be concerned about. And response effects are measurable differences in interview data that are predictable from characteristics of informants, interviewers, and even the environment. When people tell you what they think you want to know in order to not offend you, that's called, that's what we call a deference effect. When the informants tell us what they think will make them look good, then that's what's called a social desirability effect. And expectancy effect involves creating the results we want to see. So when your respondents create the results that we want to see, then that's what's called expectancy effect. An important but often overlooked response effect is inaccuracy in self-reports of behavior. This may come from people trying to answer questions even when they don't know the answer, from simple inaccurate memory, from social desirability effect, or even from simple lying. So that's the problem with interview. And the problem with interview is that it's self-reports, and self sometimes are, have bias or biases. Interviewers use skewed recall, aided recall, or bounded recall, landmarks, and time restrictions to help respondents report behavior accurately. So there are different methods to address response effects, and this is called and in one of the methods that I use myself as a researcher is to ask the question in different ways so that I can get at the so I can avoid the response effects of some of my respondents. The last part that I have here on slide is about respondent informant accuracy. Basically, I just want to point out that all research that relies on self-reports is subject to the problems of informant inaccuracy. So whether inaccuracy is the result of lying or forgetting, it is an important problem and remains the subject of research if you're a methodologist. So this concludes my lecture on unstructured and semi-structured interviewing. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Thank you for listening.